watching but unable to comment, that's still great. And I still know you're there. So thank you for coming in and watching and listening. And Earl's here. Perfect. So we're going to, again, wait about 5 minutes to let some other people get in here. And then we will get started with chapter 6 this morning. Oh, and Mila's there. Milo's there. Perfect. Had about 5 minutes, so I refilled my coffee and got myself settled in my usual spot down here. Sahaleen, you were listening to a sad song. I always like to play music first thing in the morning. So when I get up and I'm making my coffee, I always have music playing, just like what I do in the classroom, right? You guys know that I always love to listen to music. So I do that a lot when I'm at home too. Oh, well, so Stargirl, good question, Milo. Stargirl, that book is Cade's, right? So I didn't want to take it and bring it back to my house in case we are able to go back into our classroom and you guys can pick up some of your stuff. So I didn't want to take it in case we could do that. So I just brought books home that were mine. So these Harry Potter books are mine. Good morning, Reed. Oh, Sahaleen, don't stay. Okay, so maybe I'll. Hi, Bridget. Hi, Stephanie. Maybe I will. Oh, Sahaleen, maybe I'll check out that song. We'll add it. Maybe I can add it to our classroom list. We'll see. Okay, we're going to give people a couple more minutes here. We're up to 10 people now. That's awesome. And it was super, super fun to see all of you guys, or lots of you guys, this morning in our whole class chat. That was really, really awesome. I miss all of you so, so much. So that was pretty cool to see a lot of you in there. And it was really nice for us to meet Miss Bacchus too. Okay, up to 10. So while we're waiting, oh, you're outside. Very nice. While we are waiting, let's talk about chapter 5. Oh, and good morning, Joshua. Yeah, Bridget, it was a little bit glitchy. I wonder if that was just because there were so many of us. But I don't know. It might just be because there were a lot of us and everyone's computers are a little bit different. So it might just be the best that it gets, right? We can't be perfect, but even if the camera's a little bit glitchy, it's still nice to be able to hear everybody for sure. So yeah. And Dakota's here. Yeah. So that was pretty cool. Hey, I'm glad that we were able to do that. So Ms. Bacchus and I are talking about potentially doing it every Monday as a nice little check-in. So, oh, are we still working here? Okay. All right. So, okay. Let's go over what happened in chapter 5. So we read chapter 5 on Friday. So we've had a few days away from this. So remember, Ron and Harry, they weren't able to get to platform 9 3/4. They had to go and get the flying car, right? Ron's dad, Arthur, he fixed up this car so that it was able to fly. And then they got to Hogwarts and there was a big whomping willow that destroyed the car, right? And then they got in trouble, but they didn't get expelled, right? And all the other Gryffindors thought that it was really, really cool that they did that. Except for Percy, right? Percy was not very amused. Good morning, Ronan. I see you're in here too. Okay, I think we're ready to get started here. So we are on to chapter 6. I got my bookmark. So chapter 6, Gilderoy Lockhart. Are you guys ready? So remember, now that we're starting, the comment section is only for questions about the book, right? If you have other questions, save it till the end, and then we can talk about them then. Okay? All right, here we go. Chapter 6, Gilderoy Lockhart. The next day, however, Harry barely grinned once. Oh, and Douglas is here too. Great. Things started to go downhill from breakfast in the Great Hall. The 4 longhouse tables were laden with tureens of porridge, plates of kippers, mountains of toast, and dishes of eggs and bacon beneath the enchanted ceiling. Today, a dull, cloudy gray. Harry and Ron sat down at the Gryffindor table next to Hermione, who had her copy of Voyages with Vampires propped open against a milk jug. There was a slight stiffness in the way she said, "Morning," which told Harry that she was still disapproving of the way they had arrived. Neville Longbottom, on the other hand, greeted them cheerfully. Neville was a round-faced and accident-prone boy with the worst memory of anyone Harry had ever met. "Post due any minute. I think Gran's sending on a few things I forgot." Harry had only just started his porridge when, sure enough, there's a big truck going by. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Harry had only just started his porridge when, sure enough, there was a rushing sound overhead and 100 or so owls streamed in, circling the hall and dropping letters and packages into the chattering crowd. A big, lumpy parcel bounced off Neville's head, and a second later, something large and gray fell into Hermione's jug, spraying them all with milk and feathers. I've got coffee today, yep. Of course I've got coffee today. I got my Vancouver Island mug today. "Errol," said Ron, pulling the bedraggled owl out by the feet. Errol slumped, unconscious, onto the table, his legs in the air and a damp red envelope in his beak. "Oh no," Ron gasped. "It's all right. He's still alive," said Hermione, prodding Errol gently with the tip of her finger. "It's not that. It's that." Ron was pointing at the red envelope. It looked quite ordinary to Harry, but Ron and Neville were both looking at it as though they expected it to explode. "What's the matter?" said Harry. She sent me a howler," said Ron faintly. "You better open it, Ron," said Neville in a timid whisper. "It'll be worse if you don't. My Gran sent me one once, and I ignored it, and," he gulped, "it was horrible. Maybe I'll do the Corgi one sometime this week, Dakota. You'll have to wait and see." Harry looked from their petrified faces to the red envelope. "What's a howler?" he said. But Ron's whole attention was fixed on the letter, which had begun to smoke at the corners. "Open it," Neville urged. "It'll all be over in a few minutes." Ron stretched out a shaking hand, eased the envelope from Errol's beak, and slid it open. Neville stuffed his fingers in his ears. A split second later, Harry knew why. He thought for a moment it had exploded. A roar of sound filled the huge hall, shaking dust from the ceiling. "Stealing the car! I wouldn't have been surprised if they'd expelled you. You wait till I get hold of you. I don't suppose you stopped to think what your father and I went through when we saw it had gone." Mrs. Weasley's yells, 100 times louder than usual, made the plates and spoons rattle on the table and echoed deafeningly off the stone walls. People throughout the hall were swiveling around to see who had received the howler, and Ron sank so low in his chair that only his crimson forehead could be seen. Oh, your cat came in too, Ronan. "Letter from Dumbledore last night. I thought your father would die of shame. We didn't bring you up to behave like this. You and Harry could both have died." Harry had been wondering when his name was going to crop up. He tried very hard to look as though he couldn't hear the voice that was making his eardrums throb. "Absolutely disgusted. Your father's facing an inquiry at work. It's entirely your fault, and if you put another toe out of line, we'll bring you straight back home." A ringing silence fell. The red envelope, which had dropped from Ron's hand, burst into flames and curled into ashes. Harry and Ron sat stunned, as though a tidal wave had just passed over them. A few people laughed, and gradually, a babble of talk broke out again. Hermione closed Voyages with Vampires and looked down at the top of Ron's head. "Well, I don't know what you expected, Ron, but you..." Don't tell me I deserved it, snapped Ron. Harry pushed his porridge away. His insides were burning with guilt. Mr. Weasley was facing an enquiry at work. After all Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had done for him over the summer. But he had no time to dwell on this. Professor McGonagall was moving along the Gryffindor table, handing out timetables. Harry took his and saw that they had double herbology with the Hufflepuffs first. Harry, Ron, and Hermione left the castle together, crossed the vegetable patch, and made for the greenhouses where the magical plants were kept. At least the Howler had done one good thing. Hermione seemed to think they had now been punished enough and was being perfectly friendly again. Oh, when he came back from the vet. As they neared the greenhouses, they saw the rest of the class standing outside, waiting for Professor Sprout. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had only just joined them when she came striding into view across the lawn, accompanied by Gilderoy Lockhart. Professor Sprout's arms were full of bandages, and with another twinge of guilt, Harry spotted the Whomping Willow in the distance, several of its branches now in slings. Professor Sprout was a squat little witch who wore a patched hat over her flyaway hair. There was usually a large amount of earth on her clothes, and her fingernails would have made Aunt Petunia faint. Gilderoy Lockhart, however, was immaculate in sweeping robes of turquoise, his golden hair shining under a perfectly positioned turquoise hat with gold trimming. Oh, and Milo is drawing while she listens, just like we could normally do in our classroom. Oh, hello there, Lockhart called, beaming around at the assembled students. Just been showing Professor Sprout the right way to doctor a Whomping Willow. But I don't want you running away with the idea that I'm better at herbology than she is. I just happen to have met several of these exotic plants on my travels. Greenhouse 3 today, chaps, said Professor Sprout, who was looking distinctly disgruntled, not at all her usual cheerful self. There was a murmur of interest. They had only ever worked in Greenhouse 1 before. Greenhouse 3 housed far more interesting and dangerous plants. Professor Sprout took a large key from her belt and unlocked the door. Harry caught a whiff of damp earth and fertilizer, mingling with the heavy perfume of some giant umbrella-sized flowers dangling from the ceiling. He was about to follow Ron and Hermione inside when Lockhart's hand shot out. Harry, I've been wanting a word. You don't mind if he's a couple minutes late, do you, Professor Sprout? Judging by Professor Sprout's scowl, she did mind, but Lockhart said, "That's the ticket," and closed the greenhouse door in her face. Harry, said Lockhart, his large white teeth gleaming in the sunlight as he shook his head. Harry, Harry, Harry. Completely nonplussed, Harry said nothing. When I heard, well, of course, it was all my fault. Could have kicked myself. Harry had no idea what he was talking about. He was about to say so when Lockhart went on. Don't know when I've been more shocked, flying a car to Hogwarts. Well, of course, I knew at once why you'd done it. Stood out a mile. Harry, Harry, Harry. It was remarkable how he could show every one of those brilliant teeth even when he wasn't talking. Gave you a taste for publicity, didn't I? Oh, I'm having trouble reading today. Gave you a taste for publicity, didn't I? Said Lockhart. Gave you the bug. You got onto the front page of the paper with me, and you couldn't wait to do it again. Oh, no, Professor. See, Harry, 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 said Lockhart, reaching out and grasping his shoulder. I understand. Natural to want a bit more once you've had that first taste. And I blame myself for giving you that, because it was bound to go to your head. But see here, young man, you can't start flying cars to try and get yourself noticed. Just calm down, all right? Plenty of time for all that when you're older. Yes, I know what you're thinking. It's all right for him. He's an internationally famous wizard already. But when I was 12, I was just as much of a nobody as you are now. In fact, I'd say I was even more of a nobody. I mean, a few people have heard of you, haven't they? All that business with he who must not be named. He glanced at the lightning scar on Harry's forehead. I know. It's not quite as good as winning Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile award 5 times in a row, as I have. But it's a start, Harry. It's a start. He gave Harry a hearty wink and strode off. Harry stood stunned for a few seconds. Then, remembering he was supposed to be in the greenhouse, he opened the door and slid inside. Professor Sprout was standing behind a trestle bench in the center of the greenhouse. About 20 pairs of different colored earmuffs were lying on the bench. When Harry had taken his place between Ron and Hermione, she said, "We'll be repotting mandrakes today. Now, who can tell me the properties of the mandrake?" To nobody's surprise, Hermione's hand was first into the air. Mandrake, or mandragora, is a powerful restorative, said Hermione, sounding as usual, as though she had swallowed the textbook. It is used to return people who have been transfigured or cursed to their original state. Excellent. 10 points to Gryffindor, said Professor Sprout. The mandrake forms an essential part of most antidotes. It is also, however, dangerous. Who can tell me why? Hermione's hand narrowly missed Harry's glasses as it shot up again. The cry of the mandrake is fatal to anyone who hears it, she said promptly. Precisely. Take another 10 points, said Professor Sprout. Now, the mandrakes we have here are still very young. She pointed to a row of deep trays as she spoke, and everyone shuffled forward for a better look. 100 or so tufty little plants, purplish green in color, were growing there in rows. They looked quite unremarkable to Harry, who didn't have the slightest idea what Hermione meant by the cry of a mandrake. Everyone take a pair of earmuffs, said Professor Sprout. There was a scramble as everyone tried to seize a pair that wasn't pink and fluffy. You guys still hear me? Are we still working? Okay. I think we're still good. When I tell you to put them on, make sure your ears are completely covered, said Professor Sprout. When it is safe to remove them, I will give you the thumbs up. Right. Earmuffs on. Okay, good. You guys can still. Perfect. Harry snapped the earmuffs over his ears. They shut out sound completely. Professor Sprout put a pink fluffy pair over her own ears, rolled up the sleeves of her robes, grasped one of the tufty plants firmly, and pulled hard. Harry let out a gasp of surprise that no one could hear. Instead of roots, a small, muddy, and extremely ugly baby popped out of the dirt. The leaves were growing right out of his head. He had pale green, mottled skin and was clearly bawling at the top of his lungs. Okay, good. I'm glad you guys can still hear. Professor Sprout took a large plant pot from under the table and plunged the mandrake into it, burying him in dark, damp compost until only the tufted leaves were visible. Professor Sprout dusted off her hands, gave them all the thumbs up, and removed her own earmuffs. As our mandrakes are only seedlings, their cries won't kill yet, she said calmly, as though she'd just done nothing more exciting than water a begonia. However, they will knock you out for several hours, and as I'm sure none of you want to miss your first day back, make sure your earmuffs are securely in place while you work. I will attract your attention when it is time to pack up. Yep, plants. 4 to a tray. There is a large supply of pots here. Compost in the sacks over there. And be careful of the venomous tentacula. It's teething. She gave a sharp slap to a spiky dark red plant as she spoke, making it draw in the long feelers that had been inching sneakily over her shoulder. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were joined at their tray by a curly-haired Hufflepuff boy Harry knew by sight but had never spoken to. Justin Finch Fletchley, he said brightly, shaking Harry by the hand. Know who you are, of course, the famous Harry Potter. And you're Hermione Granger, always topping everything. Hermione beamed as she had her hand shaken too. And Ron Weasley, wasn't that your flying car? Ron didn't smile. The howler was obviously still on his mind. That Lockhart's something, isn't he? Said Justin happily as they began filling their plant pots with dragon dung compost. Awfully brave chap. Have you read his books? I'd have died of fear if I had been cornered in a telephone box by a werewolf, but he stayed cool and zap. Just fantastic. My name was down for Eton, you know. I can't tell you how glad I am I came here instead. Of course, Mother was slightly disappointed, but since I made her read Lockhart's books, I think she's begun to see how useful it'll be to have a fully trained wizard in the family. So, Mila, did you have a question about the book? We were talking about their in their herbology class, right? So they're learning about the different plants. So mandrakes are plants that they are when they cry, it can be deathly, but because these ones that they're working with are still babies, their cries are just going to knock them out. But they don't want that to happen either. So that's why they have earmuffs on. Okay, here we go. After that, they didn't have much chance to talk. Their earmuffs were back on, and they needed to concentrate on the mandrakes. Professor Sprout had made it look extremely easy, but it wasn't. The mandrakes didn't like coming out of the earth, but didn't seem to want to go back into it either. They squirmed, kicked, flailed their sharp little fists, and gnashed their teeth. Harry spent 10 whole minutes trying to squash a particularly fat one into a pot. By the end of the class, Harry, like everyone else, was sweaty, aching, and covered in earth. They traipsed back to the castle for a quick wash, and then the Gryffindors hurried off to Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall's classes were always hard work, but today was especially difficult. Everything Harry had learned last year seemed to have leaked out of his head during the summer. Does anybody else feel like that sometimes when you come back to school in September? He was supposed to be turning a beetle into a button, but all he managed to do was give his beetle a lot of exercise as it scuttled over the desktop, avoiding his wand. Ron was having far worse problems. He had patched up his wand with some borrowed Spello tape, but it seemed to be damaged beyond repair. It kept crackling and sparking at odd moments, and every time Ron tried to transfigure his beetle, it engulfed him in thick gray smoke, which smelled of rotten eggs. Unable to see what he was doing, Ron accidentally squashed his beetle with his elbow and had to ask for a new one. Professor McGonagall was not pleased. Harry was relieved to hear the lunch bell. His brain felt like a wrung sponge. Everyone filed out of the classroom except him and Ron, who was whacking his wand furiously on the desk. Stupid, useless thing. Write home for another one, Harry suggested, as the wand let off a volley of bangs like a firecracker. Oh yeah, and get another howler back, said Ron, stuffing his now hissing wand into his bag. It's your own fault your wand got snapped. Then they went down to lunch, where Ron's mood was not improved by Hermione showing them the handful of perfect coat buttons she had produced in Transfiguration. What have we got this afternoon? Said Harry, hastily changing the subject. Defense against the dark arts, said Hermione at once. Why, demanded Ron, seizing her timetable, have you outlined all Lockhart's lessons in little hearts? Hermione snatched the timetable back, flushing furiously. They finished lunch and went outside into overcast courtyard. Hermione sat down on a stone step and buried her nose in Voyages with Vampires again. Harry and Ron stood talking about Quidditch for several minutes before Harry became aware that he was being closely watched. Looking up, he saw the very small, mousy-haired boy he'd seen trying on the Sorting Hat last night, staring at Harry as though transfixed. He was clutching what looked like an ordinary Muggle camera, and the moment Harry looked at him, he went bright red. All right, Harry, I'm Colin Creevey, he said breathlessly, taking a tentative step forward. I'm in Gryffindor too. Would it be all right if... Can I have a picture? He said, raising the camera hopefully. A picture? Harry repeated blankly. So I can prove I've met you, said Colin Creevey, eagerly edging further forwards. I know all about you. Everyone's told me about how you survived when you-know-who tried to kill you and how he disappeared and everything and how you've still got a lightning scar on your forehead. His eyes raked Harry's hairline. And a boy in my dormitory said if I develop the film in the right position, in the right potion, the pictures will move. Colin drew a great shuddering breath of excitement and said, It's brilliant here, isn't it? I never knew all the odd stuff I could do was magic till I got the letter from Hogwarts. My dad's a milkman. He couldn't believe it either. So I'm taking loads of pictures to send home to him. And it'd be really good if I had one of you. He looked imploringly at Harry. Maybe your friend could take it and I could stand next to you. And then could you sign it? So we got some extra people listening today too. That's great. Some siblings and some pets maybe. Signed photos? You're giving out signed photos, Potter? Loud and scathing, Draco Malfoy's voice echoed around the courtyard. He had stopped right behind Colin, flanked, as he always was at Hogwarts, by his large and thuggish cronies, Crabbe and Goyle. "Everyone queue up," Malfoy roared to the crowd. "Harry Potter's giving out signed photos." "No, I'm not," said Harry angrily, his fist clenching. "Shut up, Malfoy." "You're just jealous," piped up Colin, whose entire body was about as thick as Crabbe's neck. "Jealous?" said Malfoy, who didn't need to shout anymore. Half the courtyard was listening in. "Of what?" "I don't want a foul scar right across my head, thanks. I don't think getting your head cut open makes you that special myself." Crabbe and Goyle were snickering stupidly. "Eat slugs, Malfoy," said Ron angrily. Crabbe stopped laughing and started rubbing his conker-like knuckles in a menacing way. "Be careful, Weasley," sneered Malfoy. "You don't want to start any trouble, or your mummy'll have to come and take you away from school." He put on a shrill, piercing voice. "If you put another toe out of line." A knot of Slytherin fifth-years nearby laughed loudly at this. "Weasley would like a signed photo, Potter," smirked Malfoy. "It'll be worth more than his family's whole house." Ron whipped out his spello-taped wand, but Hermione shut Voyages with Vampires with a snap and whispered, "Look out." "What's all this about?" What's all this? What's all this?" Gilderoy Lockhart was striding towards them, his turquoise robes swirling behind him. "Who's giving out signed photos?" Harry started to speak, but he was cut short as Lockhart flung an arm around his shoulders and thundered jovially. "Shouldn't have asked. We meet again, Harry." Pinned to Lockhart's side and burning with humiliation, Harry saw Malfoy slide smirking back into the crowd. "Come on then, Mr. Creevey," said Lockhart, beaming at Colin. "A double portrait. Can't say fairer than that, and we'll both sign it for you." Colin fumbled for his camera and took the picture as the bell rang behind them, signaling the start of the afternoon classes. "Off you go. Move along there," Lockhart called to the crowd, and he set off back to the castle with Harry, who was wishing he knew a good vanishing spell, still clasped to his side. "A word to the wise, Harry," said Lockhart paternally as they entered the buildings through the side door. "I covered up for you back there with young Creevey. If he was photographing me too, your schoolfellows won't think you're setting yourself up so much." Deaf to Harry's stammers, Lockhart swept him down a corridor lined with staring students and up a staircase. "Let me just say that handing out signed pictures at this stage of your career isn't sensible. Looks a tad big-headed, Harry, to be frank. There may well come a time when, like me, you'll need to keep a stack handy wherever you go, but," he gave a little chortle, "I don't think you're quite there yet." They had reached Lockhart's classroom, and he let Harry go at last. Harry yanked his robes straight and headed for a seat at the very back of the class, where he busied himself with piling all 7 of Lockhart's books in front of him so that he could avoid looking at the real thing. The rest of the class came clattering in, and Ron and Hermione sat down on either side of Harry. "You could have fried an egg on your face," said Ron. "You'd better hope Creevey doesn't meet Ginny. They'll be starting a Harry Potter fan club." "Shut up," snapped Harry. The last thing he needed was for Lockhart to hear the phrase, Harry Potter fan club. When the whole class was seated, Lockhart cleared his throat loudly, and silence fell. He reached forward, picked up Neville Longbottom's copy of Travels with Trolls, and held it up to show his own winking portrait on the front. He said, pointing at it and winking as well. "Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5 times winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award." "But I don't talk about that. I didn't get rid of the abandoned banshee by smiling at her." He waited for them to laugh. A few people smiled weakly. "I see you've all bought a complete set of my books. Well done. I thought we'd start today with a little quiz. Nothing to worry about, just to check how well you've read them, how much you've taken in." When he handed out the test papers, he returned to the front of the class and said, "You have 30 minutes. Start now." Harry looked down at his paper and read, Number 1, what is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? Number 2, what is Gilderoy Lockhart's secret ambition? Number 3, what, in your opinion, is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date? On and on it went, over 3 sides of paper, right down to number 54. When is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday? And what would his ideal gift be? You think this is a good school quiz to test about reading? Half an hour later, Lockhart collected in the papers and rifled through them in front of the class. Tut tut, hardly any of you remembered that my favorite color is lilac. I say so in Year with a Yeti, and a few of you need to read Weekend with a Werewolf more carefully. I clearly state in Chapter 12 that my ideal birthday gift would be harmony between all magic and non-magic peoples, though I wouldn't say no to a large bottle of Ogden's Old Fire whiskey. So, Mila, we're talking about, or now that they are in their Defense Against the Dark Arts class, and Gilderoy Lockhart is the professor for that class, but he's more of a celebrity than a professor, I think. So he's really excited that everybody wants to, he thinks everybody wants to take his picture, and he thinks everybody really loves him. But I think he's a little bit, a little self-centered, because he can't really see that, not everybody is as excited. Yeah, good read. He's a show-off. I like that. Thank you. Okay. So he gave them a quiz about himself, right? So it's not about Defense Against the Dark Arts. It was about, what's his favorite color, and what would his ideal birthday gift be, right? It doesn't really have anything to do with schoolwork. He gave them another roguish wink. Ron was now staring at Lockhart. Oh, a nosy show-off. Thank you, Dakota. Yeah. He gave them another roguish wink. Ron was now staring at Lockhart with an expression of disbelief on his face. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, who were sitting in front, were shaking with silent laughter. Hermione, on the other hand, was listening to Lockhart with rapt attention and gave a start when he mentioned her name. But Miss Hermione Granger knew my secret ambition is to rid the world of evil and market my own range of hair care potions. Good girl. In fact, he flipped her paper over. Full marks. Where is Miss Hermione Granger? Hermione raised a trembling hand. Excellent, beamed Lockhart. Quite excellent. Take 10 points for Gryffindor. And so, to business. He bent down behind his desk and lifted a large covered cage onto it. Now, be warned. It is my job to arm you against the foulest creatures known to wizard kind. You may find yourselves facing your worst fears in this room. Know only that no harm can befall you whilst I'm here. All I ask is that you remain calm. In spite of himself, Harry leaned around his pile of books for a better look at the cage. Lockhart placed a hand on the cover. Dean and Seamus had stopped laughing now. No, we're not going to do a house tour today. Neville was cowering in his front row seat. I must ask you not to scream, said Lockhart in a low voice. It might provoke them. As the whole class held its breath, Lockhart whipped off the cover. Yes, he said dramatically. Freshly caught Cornish pixies. Seamus Finnegan couldn't control himself. He let out a snort of laughter, which even Lockhart couldn't mistake for a scream of terror. Yes, he smiled at Seamus. Well, they're not very dangerous, are they? Seamus choked. Don't be so sure, said Lockhart, waggling a finger annoyingly at Seamus. Devilish, tricky little blighters they can be. The pixies were electric blue. Okay, enough. So now we're getting off topic here, right? This comment section is for things about the book right now. Okay, we can talk about that after. The pixies were electric blue and about 8 inches high, with pointed faces and voices so shrill it was like listening to a lot of budgies arguing. The moment the cover had been removed, they had started jabbering and rocketing around, rattling the bars and pulling bizarre faces at the people nearest them. Right then, Lockhart said loudly. Let's see what you make of them. And he opened the cage. It was pandemonium. The pixies shot in every direction like rockets. 2 of them seized Neville by the ears and lifted him into the air. Several shots straight through the window, showering the back row with broken glass. The rest proceeded to wreck the classroom more effectively than a rampaging rhino. They grabbed ink bottles and sprayed the class with them, shredding books and papers, tore pictures from the walls, upended the waste bin, grabbed bags and books and threw them out of the smashed window. Within minutes, half the class was sheltering under desks, and Neville was swinging from the candelabra in the ceiling. Come on now, round them up, round them up. They're only pixies, Lockhart shouted. He rolled up his sleeves, brandished his wand, and bellowed, Pixie Pesterome. It had absolutely no effect. One of the pixies seized Lockhart's wand and threw it out the window too. Lockhart gulped and dived under his own desk, narrowly avoiding being squashed by Neville, who fell a second later as the candelabra gave way. The bell rang, and there was a mad rush towards the exit. In the relative calm that followed, Lockhart straightened up, caught sight of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who were almost at the door, and said, "Well, I'll ask you three to just nip the rest of them back into their cage." He swept past them and shut the door quickly behind them. Can you believe him? Roared Ron as one of the remaining pixies bit him painfully on the ear. He just wants to give us some hands-on experience, said Hermione, abolishing two pixies at once with a clever freezing charm and stuffing them back into their cage. Hands-on, said Harry, who was trying to grab a pixie dancing out of reach with its tongue out. Hermione, he didn't have a clue what he was doing. Rubbish, said Hermione. You've read his books. Look at all those amazing things he's done. He says he's done, Ron muttered. And that is the end of chapter 6. So in this chapter, right, we kind of get to know Gilderoy Lockhart a little bit better. And like Reed said, he's a show-off, right? So he's, and I like what Ron said at the end of that chapter, right? Hermione's saying, look at all those amazing things he's done, right? Like we read his books and he's so amazing. And Ron says, he says he's done those things. So that might be giving us a clue to what happens later in the book, right? I don't know. We'll see. No, I'm not going to show you guys around today. Okay. I know you want to, but this is, it's not, it's a little bit different than our classroom, right? This is my house. So I'll show you my bookshelf. How about that? Oh. I'll show you here. This is my bookshelf. Can you guys see that? Oh, it's a little dark. I've got my printers down there. So I've got these are like books that I've read. These are some classroom books. There's some school resources and my printer down there. I've got lots of plants here and some other things. I've got a boomerang from when I went to Australia. I've got some other things up top. Yeah. Okay. That's all you guys get today. All right. Okay. Any questions about our story? Oh, yeah. And I like what Reed said. Maybe he takes credit for somebody else's work. Yeah. My plants, are they real? The ones on my bookshelf aren't real, but I do have some other real plants. Like, I'll show you this one. Oh, there's my kitchen. Like this one. This is a real plant that I've had for a few years. Can you see that one? Yeah. Yeah. And what else? I've got lots of real plants in my house. I love having them. There you go. You got a little sneak peek of my kitchen. Okay. Any other questions about chapter 6 there? Nothing? You guys just want to see my plants. Okay. All right. So same time tomorrow we'll do, no, I'm not going to show you the kitchen. You've got a little glimpse already. We'll see. Maybe I'll do a read aloud from a different spot in my apartment tomorrow. Who knows? Oh, you have the Harry Potter movies, Douglas. That's great. I was thinking that maybe I'll watch the first Harry Potter tonight. I'm feeling like I want to watch a Harry Potter movie. And then I'll watch the second one when we finish reading. Okay. In the book that you read, Alexander does what? Okay. Oh, your mom's obsessed with plants? I've got lots of plants in here too. I've got lots on my kitchen window, lots of different ones. Oh, he lies about the things that he's done. Interesting. So I think as our story goes on, where as this Harry Potter book goes on, we will maybe learn a little bit more about Gilderoy Lockhart, I think, okay? So I think that was a little bit, it's called foreshadowing, when a story gives us some hints, right? So I think by Ron saying, he says he does these things, that might be some foreshadowing for what's to come. So good observation there, you guys. Okay, I'm going to sign off here, and we will pick up tomorrow with our read aloud at the same time. So at 11 o'clock, and we had about 10 of us here today. Yeah, there's foreshadowing in movies and cartoons and TV shows too, Sally, and you're right. Okay, guys, have a wonderful Monday, and I will see you back here tomorrow at 11. Okay, enjoy. We'll see you later. Bye.